Hi, welcome to my channel. I'll be showing you how to make this pillowy soft vase using a really easy finger crochet technique. If you've seen my tuba toothpaste tote bag video, you'll already be familiar with this way of working using just your hands and no hook. I've had ceramics on my mind lately. I just made this sweatshirt design for my shop, and I recently visited Fonthill Castle in Pennsylvania, which is covered floor to ceiling in wonky, chunky ceramics. I've been holding onto this yarn for a while, waiting for the right project to come along, and since the color reminds me of terracotta clay, it's perfect for this vase. So aside from about 3.5 pounds of this jumbo stuffed tube yarn, you'll just need a pair of scissors and a large safety pin. I'll put links for the supplies along with information in the description. To start, you'll make a slip knot by crossing the yarn and pulling the long working end through the loop, leaving a small tail. Slip the loop onto your fingers, keeping it loose enough for some wiggle room, and take the long working end of the yarn and feed it through the loop like this. That's your first chain. Continue pulling the working yarn through the loop on your fingers 5 more times and you'll have a total of 6 chains. Try to keep them all about the same size. If you give your work a little stretch, you can see the side you want to work in will have these V shapes. If you flip your work over, you'll see the back has these middle bumps. That's the wrong side. To form the base of the vase, you'll be joining your working end into the first chain. Bring the 2 ends together like this. Then take your working yarn from the underside and feed it over and through the 2 loops on your fingers. Pull enough yarn through that it's loose enough for your fingers to move around comfortably. Put your safety pin on the stitch you just completed, the one with the loop sticking out of it. Next, find that first stitch and with your fingers in your working loop, insert them through the center of the V, picking up the outer loop of the V on your fingers and push the working yarn through both loops on your fingers. That's your first slip stitch. Then chain 1. Repeat a slip stitch followed by a chain 1 into each of the remaining 5 stitches. By putting a chain 1 between each of the slip stitches, you'll be increasing the circular base from 6 stitches to 12. You'll also notice that now that you're working in circular rounds, the direction of the V's are pointing to the right, like greater than symbols. As you work, remember to keep a nice even tension that's on the looser side. When you get to the 6th and final stitch, the one that has the safety pin attached to it, remove it and work your final slip stitch into it followed by the chain 1. At this point there should be 12 stitches in your round like I'm counting here. Then replace the safety pin back onto that last 12th stitch. Turn your circle over so the working yarn is facing up. I'm tucking the tail end in through the center to get it out of my way. With your base complete, you'll start working on the wall of the vase. Orient your work so that you can find the greater than V symbols. You may have to unroll it slightly to find them. Find the first stitch and making sure the direction of your yarn is going from the center out to the edge, make a slip stitch into the top loop of the V. Continue slip stitching into each top loop all the way around until you get to your safety pin. Then remove the pin, slip stitch, and put the pin onto your last completed stitch. As your work begins to take shape, you'll see that the loop I was calling the top loop is now more of a back loop. It's the leg of the V that's in back, or the leg that is farther away from you. For the next round, you'll be increasing with an extra chain at every 3rd stitch. That means after your 3rd stitch, you'll chain 1. So the pattern will be stitch, stitch, increase, stitch, stitch, increase, and so on until you get to the end of your round. You'll end on an increase at the stitch with the safety pin. I'll walk you through the first couple here. So that's 1 slip stitch in each of the next 3 stitches. That's 1, and that's 2. And for the 3rd stitch with the increase, you'll slip stitch as normal, and then chain 1. I'll show you the pattern again just to make sure it's clear. Slip stitch into the 1st stitch, slip stitch into the 2nd stitch, and on the 3rd stitch, make a slip stitch and then a chain 1. Keep working in this pattern, and when you get to your safety pin, as usual, remove it. Make your slip stitch followed by a chain 1, and then place the pin on your most recently completed stitch. And so far, your work should look something like this. If you count your stitches at this point, you should have 16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 with the pin. Then do a round of slip stitches, and I'll meet you back after you've replaced your safety pin on your newest stitch. After completing the round, since you haven't made any increases, you should still have the same number of stitches, 16 stitches. For the next round, you'll increase at every 4th stitch. So the pattern will be stitch, 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 chain 1. And continue around 1, 2, 3, 4, chain 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, chain 1. And 1, 2, 3, and 4, chain 1. Remember to put your pin back into your last stitch when you're finished. Then count to make sure you have the correct number of stitches. There should be 20. Next, make a round of slip stitches. When you've completed that round, your work should look something like this. You can see it's gradually getting wider with each increase round. For the next round, you'll be increasing at every other stitch, going from 20 stitches to 30. So the pattern will be stitch, stitch, chain 1, stitch, stitch, chain 1, stitch, stitch, chain 1, and repeat all the way around. As usual, you'll end with an increase at the safety pin. You should have 30 stitches, and this will be the widest part of the vase. The next few steps will be tapering it back in with decreases. So the pattern for this round is stitch, skip a stitch, stitch, and repeat this all the way around. I'll show you how to do that here. You'll slip stitch into the first stitch, and then just skip right over the next stitch and slip stitch into the following one. Then repeat the pattern again. Slip stitch into the first stitch, skip over one, and slip stitch into the next one. Your last set in this round will end with the final stitch at the safety pin. As you've been doing, remove the pin and put it on the last stitch you just completed. This decrease round should have brought your stitch count from 30 down to 20. You can see it's starting to get smaller again. Count to check that you have 20 stitches. The pattern for the next round is stitch, 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 skip one, stitch, and repeat. Stitch, 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 skip one, stitch. Stitch, 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 skip one, stitch. Stitch, 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 skip one, and stitch into the safety pin. At some point when you run out of yarn, you join the new yarn by feeding it through the next stitch, leaving a small tail, and then continue with the slip stitch like this. And then continue on. When you're done with that round, count to make sure you have reduced down to 16 stitches. For your last round of decreases, the pattern will be stitch, stitch, skip, stitch, repeat. That's stitch, stitch, skip, stitch, and repeat for the rest of the round. At this step, you should have decreased down to 12 stitches, and your work should look something like this. Then make 2 regular rounds of slip stitches. These 2 rounds will form the neck of the vase. This is the last round of the body of the vase. You'll be increasing at every stitch to make the mouth. The pattern will be stitch, chain 1. Repeat all the way around. So that's a slip stitch into the first stitch, chain 1, and so on for the rest of the round. When you're through, there should be a total of 24 stitches. After you've finished the last chain 1, fasten off with the final slip stitch. Cut the yarn leaving a few inch tail, pull the tail all the way through, and give a tug to tighten. Once the body of your vase is complete, you can weave in your tails on the inside, trimming off any excess. Also, the stitches may need some fluffing and a little bit of adjusting in certain areas, so take some time to even things out a bit and make them look nice. Next, you'll make the handles. Locate 2 stitches at opposite sides, 2 rounds down from the mouth, and directly below them around the widest part of the vase. Insert your fingers to stretch them out just a bit. Make a slip knot and join it to one of the stitches you just stretched out with a slip stitch like this. Using a tighter tension than you did with the vase body, chain 7. Then attach your chain with a slip stitch to the stitch directly above it near the top that you identified earlier. Pull the working yarn through the loop a bit, cut it leaving a short tail, and continue pulling all the way through. Pull on the end to tighten. Tuck your ends to the inside where you can weave them in. Repeat for the other handle, and your vase is complete. I'll be posting more videos soon, and in the meantime, follow my new Instagram at Noodleweaver, where I've been posting more frequently, and swing by my brand new shop that's got a bunch of fun designs which I'll link to in the description. If you enjoyed this project, check out some of my others and subscribe if you'd like to stay up to date on new videos as they come out. Thanks for watching and see you next time!